Y'all, today was such a Christmas gift for me, and it will be for you guys too. I know if you don't know Melanie Shankle, she is a New York Times bestselling author and podcast host, and she has become my new favorite person. I've asked her to mentor me. We'll see how it goes. She's got a lot on her plate. But her newest book, which comes out in February, is called Here Be Dragons. And I'm going to just leave that for y'all to hear what that means in the episode. But it is so moving, so profound, so wise, all about sort of her journey of motherhood and the path that led her on toward healing from just years of trauma as a child with her own mother. And I mean, she is deep and wise and hysterical and just good people. And I'm so grateful to know her. This is for any and every woman out there. I think it will strike chords with you no matter where you are in your life. And so I'm really grateful to end this season and this year with my new friend, Melanie Shankle.
Hey y'all, I'm Maddie, author, speaker, and certified sommelier. I think we can all agree that life can get pretty tough at times. So I'm going on a journey to uncover how some of my favorite people are chasing joy in their lives. And I'm bringing you along with me. Through their personal stories and funny encounters, I'm chatting with authors and entrepreneurs, musicians and brands to learn how they're hanging on to the good in life, even as trouble comes. Because as life gets hard, joy is a choice we can make together. I'm Maddie, and this is the Enjoy Life podcast.
All right, Melanie, thank you so much for coming on the show. You are our last finale episode for this year. And I just said beforehand, I'm so grateful to meet you today. And I'm so excited to share your story and introduce people to you if they don't know you already. So just thank you for coming.
Oh my gosh, thanks for having me. That feels like a lot of pressure to be the last guest of 2024.
The encore.
Yes.
Well, we're going to talk all about your new book. You are a prolific author and podcaster, but how we start the show is if you had a walkout song for your life right now, ending this year, and I know you know what I mean because you are, what's it called? Darling?
I was a Diamond Darling.
Something?
I was a Diamond Darling at Texas A&M. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. What would it be for you for the end of this year?
Oh man, right now I feel like, and it's probably a little bit of a cliche, but I think it would be Unwritten by Natasha Bedingfield. I think that would be my song. That would be my song.
I don't think we've had a Natasha Bedingfield answer before. Okay. So bravo.
There you go.
I think I know a little bit why, and everybody else will soon. So but before we dive into the book, will you just give us a little bit of your background, like Melanie 101, how you came to writing and kind of being the voice in this parenting space?
Okay. So my name is Melanie Shankle. I live in San Antonio, Texas with my husband, Perry. We've been married for 28 years. We have an only child, Caroline, who is a senior at Texas A&M. She's 21 now, which is hard to believe because she was just in kindergarten 2 weeks ago. And now she's about to graduate. I started a blog called Big Mama back in July of 2006, which is now like ye olden days of the internet, just because at that time, Caroline was about to turn 3. And, because you have a toddler, they're doing so much and so many things are changing and there's so many things you want to document. And I was like, I'm never going to be a scrapbooker, but I'd always loved to write. Yeah. So I was like, this is a great place to like capture these memories and just write funny stories. And over the years, the blog really kind of took off and people started to notice and read. And I guess in 2008, I was contacted by a literary agent that said, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I was like, well, that feels really hard. That sounds hard to write a book. And then
and you were right.
I was right. I was more right than I even knew. And then in 2012, 2012, I finally, so 4 years later, I finally got it together, got help putting together a proposal. And that was my first book, Sparkly Green Earrings. And so since that time, I've written 6 books, 2 devotionals, one for preteen girls, one for adult women. And then I have a children's book called Piper and Mabel, which are about our very wild, very good dogs. And, awesome. And then now I have the new book that's coming out.
Yeah, can you just be my mentor? You can send me your fee. I don't know what it is, but I think it's going to be worth it.
Done.
If you'll adopt me. I would love that. So, okay. Well, just before we go into your books too, tell us about Big Boo Podcast. Cause I've in preparing, listened to some, it's just awesome.
So back in the olden days of the internet, I met Sophie Hudson, who had a blog called Boo Mama. We immediately clicked because we both were working moms at the time. And we both had an only child that were both 3 years old. And we just started to connect and we back then the internet felt like, you didn't even use your real name. That's why I was Big Mama, because
Totally, that's right.
that was like a band of thieves were going to come
Yeah.
break into your house if you used your real name on the internet. So, but we eventually met, we became real life friends. And in 2007, her husband, who is a really techie kind of guy and knows all the stuff, he heard us talking on the phone and he said, y'all ought to start a podcast. I didn't even know what a podcast was. I'd never heard of a podcast. And so I think our first one, we got on iMessage and figured out how to record it. And we were very inconsistent, as evidenced by the fact in 2024, I think we just now reached our 400th episode. But we got really consistent with it in about 2018. And it's just grown. And now we do live shows. And we are just two moms that talk about, life and lipstick and mascara and raising kids and trusting God and everything in between. So,
yeah, could not endorse it more.
Thank
Y'all have
you.
been the audio to many of my walks these past 2 weeks. So I feel like I know you a little bit. And just as a plug, they're hilarious.
You're so sweet.
And encouraging. You have the depth that we need, to survive, but also so fun and just so
you're
fun
sweet.
to listen to.
You're sweet. I always feel like people are like, I feel like we'd be friends. And I'm like, if you listen to that nonsense for an hour every week, we would totally be friends.
That's amazing. Well, yeah, y'all go check out Big Boo Podcast. It's great. So the big reason we're connecting is your new book, which comes out in February of this coming year. And I want you to tell us the full title, because now that I've looked back at all your writing, your titles, you get the gold star for most creative and fun titles, I will say.
I try.
So what's the new book and where does the title come from?
So the new book is called Here Be Dragons. The subtitle is Treading the Deep Waters of Motherhood, Mean Girls, and Generational Trauma. So just a lighthearted, feel good.
Just beach read, girl.
Nothing. Just breezy. Just breezy.
Breezy.
Will it send you to therapy? Maybe. Did it send me to therapy writing it? Yes, it did.
For sure.
So that's the new book. The title came from years ago. I had read this long before I knew this was ever going to be a book, or I even knew what this book was going to be. I had read this article, and it talked about how in ancient times, when people would set sail across the sea, think Christopher Columbus or whatever, we didn't have Apple Maps to tell us there's traffic 5 miles from your house. There are 3 traffic lights that there's a blue car stalled on the side of the road. So you would take off, but they would do these maps and they would mark different territories, things that they knew, things that, obstacles that you would come. But whenever there was a place that looked unknown or unexplored, or where maybe another ship had sunk and there might be some danger there, in Latin, the ancient cartographers would write, "Here be dragons." And it just signified, hey, there may be danger up ahead. You need to be alert. And so that really stuck with me, because even at the time I was like, man, isn't that like a metaphor for our life, where we're just,
Here be dragons.
Here be dragons. You don't know what's ahead. Man, it would be easier or maybe worse if we knew what was ahead, but you can't prepare until you're in that moment. And so it just really stuck with me. And so originally, when I wrote the proposal for this book, I thought it was going to really be more about, I knew the mean girl component, because that was something that so many moms had told me that their daughters have struggled with and wished that I would write more about it. I also knew that it was going to be about kind of the empty nest chapter of my life, because my daughter had just gone off to college. What I didn't know at the time, that it was going to also tie in the generational trauma piece. But then, as God has a way of doing, kind of life came together in a way where it was like, okay, well, now it's time to tell that story. So there is the title.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I think that it's so interesting that this kind of came out of real-time processing for you, it seems like.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, everything that rolls into the generational trauma part, and Melanie's childhood part and all of that. I'm just going to steal a real hard question from your friend Erin from the book.
Okay.
When she asked you, what was the beginning of knowing you needed to heal this relationship with your mom? When did you know you were damaged?
Man, I think that's such an interesting question, because I really have tried to go back and trace it. And it feels like from my earliest memories, maybe something in me knew something wasn't right there. But I think as a kid, one of the things God does is I feel like he protects you. So you don't really know sometimes how messed up your childhood is until you get out of it. And I think for me, it was when I got to college, and all of a sudden you're out from under it. So you have time to reflect back on it. And I think that's at an age, and I see it with my daughter now, where you start to meet other people and you have real conversations about what was your family like or how did you grow
Mhm.
up. And I think when I was about 18 or 19 was when I was like, oh, so I don't think this was normal. Like
Mm.
I think that I thought this was normal because it's all I'd ever
Mhm.
known, but now I realize there were things that were very messed up. So I mean, I think for me it was that early adulthood, 18, 19, 20.
Yeah, so I mean, it's been decades of personally reflecting, processing, dealing, all culminating in writing this,
Yeah.
just couple 20 something years later, I'm sure.
Yeah. And I think because the story kept going, you start to discover
Mhm.
stuff at 18, 19, 20, and that ultimately opens up like this Pandora's box of,
Mhm.
oh man, there is a lot. And it was funny because as I wrote the book, my husband, he never reads what I write until after I'm done. I mean, sometimes, let's be honest, he hasn't even read probably three of my
Yeah.
books.
I
But
thought that's where you were going, which
yeah,
is why I'm laughing, but I was like, typical,
yeah,
typical.
yeah.
Yeah.
Normally it does not, but this one, after it was all done, and I got the early reader copies. I mean, but he sat down to read it, and he was like, "Man," he was like, "I lived so much of this with you, but to
Mm.
read it in a whole thing where it's all there in one place," he was like, "This is a lot of stuff," and I was like,
Mhm.
"Yes, it is a lot of stuff."
Yeah, it is a lot of stuff, and I will say, like, you write, very early in the book, and it might have even been the introduction, because 'cause you're talking about Caroline, your daughter, and, like, what
Hmm.
y'all dealt with in high school and everything that you referred to earlier, and you just write this line that literally my stomach's turning about to read it off the page,
Mm.
where you just wrote, "My mom was my first mean girl,"
Yeah,
and it's just, like, that's heartbreaking and breathtaking, and just to put that out into the world, and I'm sure admit it to yourself, was just I don't think there's a follow-up question. I just want people to know that, like, that's how honest you are in this book.
yeah.
And then on the next page, I was LOL. Like, it's so you really hit every emotion in this, and you're such a great storyteller. So I say that to sort of preface, if people are like, these are a little deep waters for
Yeah,
me, click. No.
yeah,
Keep listening, read the book. Like, it's the full spectrum of life that you offer to us. So I'm thankful for that, because otherwise it would be a
yeah.
little too much to work through for 200 pages. But I've heard the term a lot, but, like, could you give us at least your kind of definition or understanding of what you mean by generational trauma? That's a big
Yeah,
therapy word.
yeah, it is a big thing. And it was funny because as we were, when I was working with my publisher on there, we were like, what do we say? Generational dysfunction. That's a big word
Mhm.
for a book cover.
Yeah.
So we came to trauma. But I thought, to me, it's the thing, and it's biblical. It's like the things that get handed down. You
Mm.
think about, and we read about, in the Bible, you're always like, oh, the sins of the father, and you're like,
Yeah.
whoa, that feels like, to the
Mm.
seventh generation or whatever, and that feels so heavy. But it's
Mhm.
so true because I just think in every family, just like our DNA is handed down, our bloodlines are handed down. I think that there are behaviors and there are sins
Mm.
and there are things that we just pass down. And some of
Mhm.
them maybe are, yeah, I think most of them are inadvertent. Like you don't even realize. I think families have this way of you circle in and it's like, but this is the way we've always been. And you're like,
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean that it's right. And
Mhm.
I think those things can be, I mean, it can be anxiety, depression, alcoholism, it can be vanity. It can be just whatever that thing
Mm.
is that has a grip on your family and that you see in your bloodline. And I think there's something about becoming a parent, at least that was
Mm.
for me, where you start to go, what do I want to do different for my child?
Mm.
And I think sometimes it's not even that it was something that was so toxic. You can look and go, this worked for my parents. This is not the way I want to
Right.
parent.
Yeah.
And I also think we're in a different time. I mean, I was a kid of the 70s and 80s. I'm like, there were a lot of things parents did in the 70s and 80s. I mean, we rolled around in the back of a station wagon while everybody
Yeah.
smoked their cigarettes and there wasn't a
Yeah.
seatbelt to be found. And, so sometimes you just do better
Yeah.
generationally. But I also think there are just things
Funny.
that get handed down and you have to break those cycles if you want to create a healthier legacy going forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that you speak to the fact that it can run the spectrum,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of conversations that I have around, like, trauma doesn't always have a capital T, and that doesn't
Yeah.
mean it's not trauma. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that it's physical abuse. It doesn't even
Hmm.
mean that it's, like, in my case, a death trauma. It,
Yeah.
it can be anything on the
Hmm.
list of those things and many more that you mentioned, and that they still have such a compounding effect on who you are and how you relate, and
Yep.
whether you realize it or not. I think
Hmm.
that's kind of the scary thing, is, like, And I've been in that boat where I'm like, do I want to dive into this? Do I want to
Yeah.
really look at, family of origin cycles, or do I want to just keep swimming along
Yes.
with my head in the sand? And it's like, you're not going to keep swimming along. Like
Yeah.
it's going to come up at some point.
Yeah.
So there's freedom at some point in really looking back on those things, as objectively as you can.
Yeah.
I think that was something I'm interested in, hearing from you. If people are like, I know there's stuff I need to deal with, or I've become a parent like I have,
Mhm.
and I'm starting to see these things come out in me that I didn't realize were there. How do I start? Like, how do I look back,
Yeah.
and uncover as objectively as possible? Because
Yeah.
it's always emotional,
For
obviously,
sure. Yeah. And I think that's what's so hard is because you
Yeah.
look back and it's like, what do you want to hand down? What do you want to continue a legacy? Because the thing is when you look back, most of the time in childhood, you can't say something was all bad or all good.
Right.
There's good and bad in all things and in all circumstances. So it's just kind of figuring out, where do I need to heal? And am I going to allow myself to heal? Because like you said, I think it's so much easier, and I think even writing this book, I thought, oh, I'm writing this from a place of being completely healed. And as I wrote the book, I was like, oh, so maybe not
Not so
as much as I thought, maybe not as,
yeah.
we still got some work to do. So, that's part of it.
You don't have to dive into all the ins and outs, but for people who have, whether it's a parent or family member, good friend or something, that they're working to heal from
Mhm.
whatever
Mhm.
that looks like, and they get to a place where they know that daily connection and communication needs to stop.
Yeah.
How can they heal and forgive and also set the hardest boundary you can set, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that is such a great question, Maddie. I feel like number one, to me, the thing about the people in your life, and I've always heard this and it's so true, is the people in your life that you need to set boundaries with are usually the people who are going to push the hardest against
For
those
sure.
boundaries. That's the way it always goes. And so I think it can be so hard. I will say that for me with my mom, and what I try to say in the book and communicate, is I think the decision to stop daily contact or to go no contact with a person, I think it has to be such an intentional, prayerful decision.
Mm.
And I know for me in my life, it had to get to a point where it wasn't going to come out of anger. It wasn't going to come out of bitterness. It wasn't going to come out of unforgiveness, because I thought, if I do it out of these things, and there were years long before I did it where my knee jerk was like, I'm done.
Mhm.
But I was like, not yet. Like, it was just always like, I can't do it because it would be for the wrong reasons. And I would be creating bitterness and unforgiveness in my own
Wow.
life, because I'm like, bitterness is it rots your bones. I mean, that's,
Mhm.
and so I didn't want it to be out of those reasons. So what I would tell somebody is like, you need to very prayerfully and very
Mm.
intentionally make that decision. And you have
Yeah.
to know that God is in that decision, because I think if you just do it out of your own, like, this feels easier, because to me, also, I think once I made that decision, you think, oh man, that's going to feel great. Well, no, it never feels great
No.
to
Oh
cut somebody
gosh.
out of your life.
Mm-mm.
So that creates a whole other set of, issues and complications and things to work through. So it's also not a quick fix for anything. So
Yeah.
I just think it has to be very intentional and very prayerful. And you really have to go, what are the pros? Is there any way that I can peacefully exist with this person in my life? And if that answer increasingly becomes no, then I think you start to take the steps of, what do I need to do to protect my peace?
Man, that is so wise. I'm
Yeah.
gonna double down
So,
on my offer to be your mentee
okay.
after that.
I'm ready.
Well, no, and I think that truly does apply to any, boundary that you need to set. I think that wisdom applies. Is it's not just, if your knee jerk reaction is to create a fence to keep them out versus to create a boundary to keep you safe,
That's
then you
right.
got to keep praying on that.
Yeah.
Like that it will only hurt you. Like you said, the bitterness
Mhm.
that rots your bones. That's incredible. I also want to hear from you just very briefly, sort of as an aside. There's several people in my life that are very, very close to me that kind of are on new chapters post divorce. And I'm
Yeah.
sure everyone listening knows, that has a whole handful, if it's not you.
Yeah.
And so that was your parents' story, and you write a lot about that as a kid. And then you write about kind of the season you referenced earlier of your college years, where your eyes started to kind of open to the truths of everything that you'd gone through, and you have this incredibly poignant moment in conversation with your dad where
Mhm.
you finally ask these questions that you were really scared to answer. Can you just give us a little glimpse of what that was like and what it revealed to you about him as a parent, because I think it was
Yeah.
so powerful and just
Yeah.
amazing.
The thing about my dad, when I look back, and I talk about this, my parents got divorced when I was 8. And for years, my mom always really tried to paint him as this absentee parent who walked out on us and chose, another woman and another life and all of that. But I think that's where, even as a kid, I was like, but this doesn't make sense because he comes to see us every single weekend and we would go
Mm.
stay at his apartment every single Wednesday night. And even when she moved us to another city 90 miles away, I mean, he would come in, and now as an adult, I know this is the ultimate act of love. He would come in on the weekends and spend the weekend with his parents so that we
Mm.
could stay there with him. And you know how
Yeah.
that goes,
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
that thermostat's on 75 and it's a situation,
So
you know?
is.
So for
It's
him to do that as a
so true.
grown man, just so that he could be with his
Mhm.
girls.
Mm.
And I think even in high school he would come in to spend the weekend, and I mean, I would be like, peace out, I'm going out with my friends. But he just was
Mm.
always around. So there were so many things that didn't reconcile with the way my mom tried to paint him versus who he was.
Mhm.
He just always took the high road, and he just
Mhm.
always showed up, and he was always faithful. And so kind of the catalyst, when I started dating my husband, Perry, at the time I was about 20, I was 23, and I was out of college. And when Perry met my parents, I had kind of given him, you give, that your significant other, this Cliff Notes version of
Yeah.
this is who I am. This is what I grew up with. This is my story. And so when Perry met my parents for the first time, he had met my mom, and then later he met my dad and stepmom. And he was like, I don't feel like you've got the whole story here based on
Mhm.
who I met. And, I think sometimes you need a fresh set of eyes because
Mhm.
things are so ingrained in you that you
Mhm.
don't know. And he was like, I don't think you have the whole story. And so, as it turned out, my mom came to visit me that weekend. And for whatever reason, I kind of asked her. No, I had told my dad, I said, can we talk next time you come to town? I just have some questions I want to ask you. And he was like, great. And so I told my mom, I said, I'm going to talk to dad this next weekend. And for whatever reason, for the first time, I was 23 years old, my mom was very honest about what had really broken down the marriage and that it wasn't really my dad's fault. And I guess she decided that at 23, my dad was going to expose her.
Mhm.
I don't know if he would have at that point or not. I really don't. But
Mm.
when he and I sat down at a Luby's cafeteria, so if you, we're all
You used to
good.
hit that up in the
Yeah.
Cool Springs Mall on the reg.
Listen, I
Great
meant
mac and cheese.
a great mac and cheese. I mean, so over my fried fish Luann platter,
Amazing.
I told my dad, I said, I talked to mom this weekend. I said, I feel like I know some things. Will you tell me your side of the story? And as he began to tell it, and here's the thing, he told it without any bitterness. He told it without
Mm.
any resentment. It was just like, I always knew that someday the truth would come to light. And I did not want to do anything to turn you against your mother,
Mm.
who was raising me at the time. And I think when you look at the book, one of the things my dad and I've had this conversation about is he said back in the 70s and 80s during this time period, he said, even if I had tried to get custody of y'all, what would that have looked like? Because
Mhm.
there again, it was a different time.
Yeah.
And so anyway, as he began to tell these things, it gave me such insight into, number one, he was who I believed him to be, that he had
Mm.
always been true and he had always been faithful and he had always been honorable. And not only that, but he had always taken the high road while he was being vilified,
Mhm.
while he knew that lies were being told him. And man, isn't that the hardest thing as a human?
Golly.
Because haven't we all been in that
Yeah.
place where people are believing things about you that aren't true? And to think that for him, it was his own kids,
Mm.
but that he chose to protect us in that moment,
Mhm.
knowing this isn't the time for that to come to light. I mean, you're playing the long game of,
Yeah.
eventually the truth will come out. So
Yeah.
it's something when I really think about it,
Yeah.
how hard that had to have been.
Oh, it's unbelievable. That was such a poignant moment, and just what you wrote that I pulled out simply said that it's not that he did things perfectly so much as he did them honorably and with integrity, and I
Yeah.
can't imagine a harder circumstance to act with honor and integrity
Hmm.
because you're just getting assaulted over and over, and
Yep.
just I don't know, I just wanna say thank you to him for all the people listening that have to be that person, and it's not
Hmm.
fair. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? Because it's just not.
And I think that's such a thing, when if you're listening to this and you are divorced or you find yourself in that situation, like there is something about taking that high road with your kids
Mm.
and being like, you know what, I'm going to let this play out, because it
Yeah.
may not be till they're 18, 19, 20 that they see everything for what it is, but at some point you have to know that the truth of a situation is going to come to light. And there's something to be said for protecting them when they're too young to know those truths.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so good. It's so good. Does he live? Is he still alive? Does he live
Oh yeah.
close to
Oh
y'all?
yeah. He lives like a mile away. So
Oh, God bless him.
I know. So he had my stepmom. They had always lived in Houston. I'm in San Antonio, but when Caroline was 2, he basically was like, yeah, I've got to be where the grandbaby is.
Oh,
And so, yeah, so they live like a mile away. So we see
I
them all
love
the
that.
time. Yeah, it's great. It's
I
great.
love that so much. So, as I mentioned earlier, so much of what you talk about and have written about before this book is motherhood and parenting and your
Mhm.
daughter. And talk to us about Caroline, the start of motherhood, and kind of where you were in the process of, dealing with all this.
Yeah, it's funny because when Caroline was born, I was 32. So we had been married about 6 years. I'd had a miscarriage before that, so that had kind of, thrown off my schedule a little bit. But anyway, I had Caroline, and it was funny because when I had that ultrasound, the sonogram that tells you what you're having, because I'm not a person to wait. So when you find out what you're having, and when I found out it was a girl, I was so excited it was a girl, and I was terrified that it was a girl.
Mm,
Because what you start to wonder is, am I going to know how to parent her in the right way? Like, am I going to be able to be a good mother? Because I think that same sex parental dynamic is so complex because
mm.
I think what I realized really early on in her toddler years, I was like, oh, she is in no way a mini version of me. She is very
Oh,
much
yeah.
her own person.
Mm,
I was just scared, where I just thought, am I going to be able to do this? And during that time, God led me I was sitting in a church service, and there was a verse where it talked about, like, the old is gone, the new has come, like new grass will spring up, like this is
mm.
not. And it was like, this one will say, I am the Lord's. And I just
So
felt like
good.
it was God's promise to me of, I'm going to do something new here.
Mm,
And then when I brought her home from the hospital, and I talk about this in the introduction, like, I mean, just holding her as a newborn and just being like, I've never loved something so much. Like, I didn't even know this capacity to love this little, which at that point is like a 5-pound sack of sugar. They
yeah.
do nothing, but you're like, oh
Just
my
not,
gosh,
yeah,
I would do
exactly.
anything for you. But it was just in that moment where it crystallized it for me, where I was like, oh, my mom never loved me like this. Like, she just didn't love me like this. And so I think the thing is then you almost swing. And I had some lessons to learn, because as you're like, I'm going to be the perfect mom like
Mm.
this. I'm going to be the perfect mom. I'm going to do it all perfectly. And the thing is none of us are going to do it perfectly. We're going to yell too loud. We're going to get
Yeah.
impatient. We're going to, make mistakes. We're going to have days where we are just done and we go hide out in the bathroom because we're like, if you say mommy one more time, I'm going to throw something
Yeah.
across the room. I mean, that's real life. So it's like also giving yourself grace of, like, as
Yeah.
much as you're trying to do something new, you're never going to do it perfect. You're still
Yeah.
figuring it out. I'm still figuring out. She's 21, and there are still
Yeah.
times where I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing here. So it's just trusting that God is going to give you the wisdom and the strength that you need in every moment, and that there's always grace when you mess up, because you're going to mess up.
Yeah, I think that's just, and my son's 5 months old, so I don't
Yeah.
have much wisdom to offer, but I'm like, I think all of us have to enter motherhood or parenthood thinking, like, with some sort of expectation of either, in your case, I'm gonna do this totally different, or in
Mhm.
other people's cases, like, man, I've gotta live up to the mom that I
Yeah.
had, and, like, either one is crushing,
Yeah.
It's just not
Yeah.
reality.
No. And I
Yeah.
think if you've had a great mom, I think that's so hard, because you don't know all the ways that she did struggle, or that it was
Mm,
hard, or, that she did lose her patience. But what you
yeah.
saw as a kid, I think as parents, and it feels like culture has switched to where we feel this pressure of, like, we've got to make our kids' childhood magical. And you're like, childhood just is magical. Like,
Yeah.
by and large, you get summers off. I mean, the tooth
Yeah.
fairy comes, you've got Santa Claus. I mean, it is magical. So, like, it's not up to us
Yeah.
to make it all, because, as kids, I just think there's so much protection there and things that they don't see. And, we're so
Mm.
busy, like, we've got to go to Disney World by the time they're 2, or they're going to end up in therapy. And I'm like, or you could just take them to, like, the Disney store, and they don't know the
And they'll
difference.
be thrilled.
Yeah, they don't care.
I
So,
I listened to you and Sophie talk about this a lot on your show, and I'm really grateful for this. It feels freeing, I think, for moms,
mhm.
especially of my generation that have little kids now. And I've heard y'all use the term, like, it's not up to us to curate their
Yeah,
life.
yeah.
A lot of people need to hear that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that as parents, that's it, is you want to create, number one, you want to create these magical moments. Like, we feel like this is Christmas time, so let's talk about it. The elf on the shelf
Yeah.
is a whole situation. You
Oh,
know what I mean?
I
Like,
dread.
And God bless you if you want to do it and it's fun. But at some point, I'm like, what are we doing? Like pouring flour all over your kitchen so
Yeah.
that the elf, because guess who has to clean that up? You have to clean that up. And your kids might be just as excited to find an elf sitting in their breakfast chair. Like,
Yeah.
take some of the pressure off. It's an elf that shows up in their house.
Oh, God.
But I think we
So
want to
funny.
curate these things, and we want our kids to have this incredible experience that maybe we either didn't have, or to try to replicate what we had. And ultimately, I feel like, and I can say this now, having a 21-year-old, so many of the things that Caroline thinks back on and remembers are the most mundane things, where she's like, remember when the streets flooded and we got stuck at the bowling alley and we had to bowl for hours? And I'm like, yes, at the time I thought that was a terrible day. But for her, it was such a fun day. Like, and so I think that we have to remember that as we're trying to shape this, and here's what I will tell you too, it gets harder as they get older, because when they're little, you can kind of do things. If they have a bad day, you can give them a cookie and that fixes it. You can, go to the store and get some M&Ms and that's a triumph. But as they get older and they have broken hearts and hard things and friendships that go sideways, and, they don't make the team and all of those things, now I have a 21-year-old who's trying to figure out, like, what am I going to do after college, and what does life look like? And you know what I can do about that? Not one thing. It's not in my control. It's not in my power. And the amount of prayers, I mean, I've said my year of 2024, my word has been surrender, because it's just that thing of, I cannot control this. And you want to so bad. But what we have to remember as moms is sometimes the very things that we're looking at and feel like are hurting our kids, or are so hard for our kids, or struggles for our kids, are the very things that God is using to shape them into who he needs them to become. And if we protect them from that, then all we're doing them is protecting them, or keeping them right from the center of his will and what he has for them. And you don't want that, because what we want to raise are these gritty, resilient, strong world changers that aren't going to be afraid to go out and take a risk and do big things. And if we keep them in a little bubble, then all they're ever going to do is be in their little bubble.
Yeah, that really struck me a lot, as you talking about specifically those high school years that were so hard for your daughter, and realizing, being so, as you would be, hurt and angry and frustrated for her, and then remembering, oh yeah, I prayed for her to be strong, and I prayed for her to trust God, and I prayed for her to have integrity, and this exact situation is building those things in her, even though I hate it.
That's it. And that's the whole, well, and I'd read this story a while back and it really stuck with me. And it was about, there's a moth called like an emperor moth, and it's huge. And like somebody was watching one hatch and it was really struggling to get out of its egg, like it were a little cocoon, like it was just struggling. And so they decided to like take scissors and like cut. Well, then what happened was it wasn't able to fly, because the thing that built up its wings is the struggle to get out. And I thought so many times we're, as parents, we're wanting to come in and cut that cocoon, and God is like, no, you got to let them struggle.
Oh, gosh.
But man, so it's hard. I mean, as I say that, I'm saying it's gut wrenching, because I almost think it's worse as a parent to watch your kid go through things than it was for when you went through them yourself.
Oh, I'm sure. I feel that 100%. And so how would you just, like, if you could practically kind of speak to people on that, like when we're in that, when we want to cut the cocoon moment, like what helps you not do that, but still be present with her, like what's that look like really?
And I think that's the big thing, is like, so many times I felt like raising a teenager, people were like, oh, teenagers are the worst. Like teenagers, they don't want anything to do with you. Teenagers are whatever. And that can be true. Like they can act aloof and they can go off to their rooms and they're going to be moody as all get out. That's just the way it goes. We were there. We were once teenage girls.
Yeah.
But it's knowing that, number one, that's the time to draw in close, even if they act like they don't want you to, that you're like, I'm here, I'm listening, I'm your biggest fan. Like I am your biggest fan, and we're going to get through this. And I can't make it easier on you, but I can pray for you, and I can love you, and I can cook you mac and cheese on a hard day. And we can do all of those things. But I think I think it takes faith. I mean, I think the only way is to really trust, okay, God, I trust that, number one, you see her and you love her and know her more than I do. And so you know what's best for her. I trust the process of what you're doing. And I just pray. I used to pray for Caroline every morning on the way to school, that God would protect her physically, emotionally, spiritually. And just know that he's going to answer those prayers. And that may not look the way you want it to look. And it certainly doesn't insulate them from hard times, but just know that he's got them. And sometimes as parents, the best thing we can do is say, God, you created her. And so I trust you with her.
Yeah, that's so hard.
Yeah, it's so hard.
For parents who are heading into those years, if they're, like, in a kinda junior high, middle school
Mhm.
situation, which is also drama, Mean Girl, but
Yeah.
is there anything you feel like looking back that you did or you wished you had done that could have, like, kinda prepared her for that, if that makes sense? Or do you
Yeah.
just kinda gotta let them
I mean, I
fall
almost
face
yeah,
first
I mean
and learn from there, you know what I mean? Like
yeah. I mean, I almost think you just have to I mean, buckle up. Where's your dragons? I mean, your dragons
yeah.
are going to come. And I mean, and I talk about in the book, like we kind of made it through junior high, which I was kind of mentally prepared of, oh, junior high is going to be awful. And then I was like, oh,
Mhm.
junior high was not that bad.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we got to sophomore year of high school and it was like a kick in the face. And
Mm.
I thought we had made it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was patting myself on the
Yeah.
back for how great this had
Crushed
gone.
it.
Yeah. All I can say is I think you have to build a strong spiritual foundation in yourself. And I think you have to build a strong spiritual foundation in your child. I think that for Caroline, I would say there again, not that she was always, and she played competitive soccer. So I'm not even going to pretend like we were in church every Sunday. So I'm not going to say, but like we were like, you need to be involved in something, a young life. We have
Mhm.
campus life here, like something that gives you that spiritual foundation, because I think that's going to be the component that's going to keep them
Mm.
grounded and at
Mhm.
least give them some sort of a compass that's going to help them find their way. I know for me as a teenager, the fact that I had always been in church and done all that stuff, even if it for the wrong reasons, when life kind of went sideways, that was the thing that I knew to come
Yeah.
back to. And
Yeah.
I just think that you can't discount how important that is to give your kids some kind of faith basis for what life is going to bring.
Yeah, and that as a teenage girl yourself and as a mom, like, even if they write it off like it's not taking or
Yeah.
they're not interested, that
Hmm.
it is taking and the
Yeah.
Holy Spirit's working and it will be a foundation they remember,
That's it.
when they need it.
That's it. Yeah. There
Yeah.
are so many things that I will say now. Caroline will say back to me, like, even I think it was about a year ago. She was like, remember how you told me, like in high school, that you always prayed that God would remove anybody from my life who didn't need to be there? And she was like, that made life probably a lot harder for me. And I was like, yes, it did, but it also made it better. So you're welcome.
Yeah.
But I
That's
think there are things that at the time I wouldn't have even known that she was absorbing that I was saying
Mhm.
that or how important that was. But it comes back. It
Yeah,
comes back
that's
around.
good. That's good. I, don't often pull questions from the, like, PR things just
Yeah.
because I read the book and
Uh-huh.
there's stuff that strikes me different. But one that was on there was, "How do you experience Isaiah 61, beauty from ashes through
Mhm.
raising Caroline?" It's just one of my favorite verses, so I just wanna know
Yeah.
what that answer is.
To me, the beauty for ashes, and, I think that, and then when God talks about restoring what the locusts have eaten, it's
Mm.
just such a picture of that God is always redeeming everything,
Mm.
that He is a God of redemption. And through the hardest things that we go through, because you think ashes mean fire. And so that means
Mhm.
everything has burned down. It means things have been destroyed. It means dreams that you held in your heart burn down. And as humans, that's so hard because we cling so hard to our story and what we want our story to be and the way we think our story should look. And when it doesn't, I think there can be anger. I think there can be bitterness. I think there can be disappointment. I think you see people lose their faith.
Mm.
But what I will say is, I have lived long enough to see that the beauty for ashes is so real, because when I look at my relationship with my mom and all the ways that I've grieved that I didn't have the mom that I wish that I had had, that I was not necessarily loved by her the way that I wish I had, that I so wish that I'd had this great relationship with, a mom that we travel together and have fun together and all of
Mm.
those things. But what I see that God did over the course of 21 years, and longer than that, I mean, 53 if you go with my age, but over the course of Caroline's life, is that she is my beauty for ashes, that
Mm.
she is the redemption, because I I get to be the mom to her that I wish that I had had,
Mm.
and I get to have that relationship on the other side of it. And I think sometimes the most healing thing is if you get to be the thing in somebody else's life that you wish that you had had
Oh,
in
wow.
yours.
Yeah.
And there's just
Man.
something so beautiful about that and so full circle about that. And I just think God is a God of a full circle and new beginnings.
Mm.
And
Mm.
it's a thing to remember. And the amount of times that I'm like, Lord, I need to see your beauty for ashes. That's what I'm praying for in this
Yeah.
situation. Because, there have been all kinds of times where you're like, this story
Yeah.
is not what I wanted this story to be. So,
Yeah, that's so beautiful. He does. He redeems over and over and over and
mhm.
over again. Well, we could talk for hours and hours, but I do want to selfishly kind of pick your brain on, since you have the long-term vision on parenting,
Yeah.
is there anything for anyone listening, no matter the season, whether it's, newborn, toddlers, the school age, whatever, that
Yeah.
you just want to, that would be your kind of big takeaway for everybody that you did or wish you'd done or whatever, just the golden nuggets.
I think the biggest thing to me is, beyond the, giving them a faith foundation and instilling that in them. I think the biggest thing is let your kids be who God created them to be. I think as parents, sometimes we want to create these mini versions of ourselves, or we have these, hopes and dreams for them. And we want to see them be, captain of the football team, but maybe what God created them to be is the leader of the band, and maybe what God created them to be is the sweet kid in the cafeteria who'll make friends with a new kid, and that's, let them be those things, and don't project what we think success looks like. Don't project what we think accomplishment looks like on our kids, and let their story unfold. Because I think we can get wrapped up in so much disappointment if we have this vision of what we want and hope for them, as opposed to saying, God, I trust you. You gave them to me for a reason. Help me to steward their gifts and the way you created them, and to be exactly who they're going to be. I mean, I say that with Caroline, like, I was such a girly girl. I probably played with Barbies way too long when I was a child. I mean, I've always loved, makeup and hair and all that stuff. And as she's gotten older, she does too. But her preschool teachers used to laugh because I would send her off to school and she was always dressed and she had these big bows in her hair. And they told me later that she would walk in first thing every morning and take the bows out of her hair and hand them to the teacher and say, no, thank you. No, thank you. So,
that's so good.
But I look at her and I'm like, she is fierce and she is strong and she loves to go hunting with her dad. And, she's all these things that, like, I'm so in awe of. But I'm like, if I had tried to keep her in this little bubble of what I thought she was going to be, I would have missed all this. So I would just encourage you to just, trust who God has given you to raise, and watch them become all that He created them to be, because it's kind of a great adventure.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think kids are very intuitive. They know when you're pushing your expectations, and they know when you do it right. When you're like, I don't get it, but give me the bows and here's your camo. You know what I mean? Like my parents did that really well, and we're all three really different.
Yeah.
And I think they did it the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it raises emotionally strong kids who know that they are loved and valued for exactly who they are. And I don't know what better thing to send out in the world than that.
Gosh. Yeah. Amen. We'll double down and close the sermon on that. But I mean, really how we close is wanting to know, Melanie, what is something bringing you joy right now?
I would say just the Christmas season. I mean, I'm excited that it's Christmas time. There's something about, this has been a hard year in a lot of ways. I think, finishing up this book and just, kind of, having an adult child, and that's hard in its own ways. Listen, your listeners are probably all young. I'm also perimenopausal. So that comes with its own, listen, that's a situation. So it's been a hard year in a lot of ways, but something about hitting Christmas season is like, it just feels like we made it. And so there's just been joy to me in seeing Christmas lights and Christmas decorations and the weather cooling off finally, because I'm in Texas and it takes forever. And so that's just bringing me a lot of joy right now.
I love that. No better way to end. Melanie, where can everybody pre-order Here Be Dragons, find all your other books, and obviously the Big Boo podcast?
Yep. You can find, so the best place to follow me is on Instagram. I'm Melanie Shankle on Instagram, and there are links there to buy the book. You can get it at all your major booksellers, BNN, Target, Amazon, ChristianBooks.com, all the places. Your local indie bookstore, you should be able to pre-order from those as well if you want to. The Big Boo Cast is wherever you listen to your podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, your podcast app, wherever. But we would love to have you. We'd love to have you listen.
Red hot endorsement for me. So there you go.
Thanks, Patty.
Congratulations on a beautiful work. This is gonna be exactly what a lot of people need to find freedom. So
thank you. I've loved talking to you. Thanks for having me.
A huge thanks to you for listening. If you liked what you heard, if you felt encouraged or found a little joy in today's conversation, please go like or subscribe to the show so you can get regular updates of all new episodes, and head over to maddiejackson.net to see both of my books and my latest online course, Through the Valley of Grief, a 6-week guide toward restored faith and renewed hope.